The alarm screamed through the communication center of Lunar Station like a dying animal. Captain Rebecca Hayes dropped her coffee cup, the dark liquid spreading across reports she had been reading about supply shortages in the outer colonies. The sound meant only one thing: someone, somewhere in the galaxy, was about to die. She ran to the main console where Lieutenant Tom Bradley was already working, his fingers flying over the controls. The distress signal came in waves, cutting through space from a system so far away that the light from their sun had left before Rebecca was born. But distance meant nothing when people were screaming for help. "What do we have?" Rebecca asked, pulling up her own screen. "Mining colony called New Haven," Tom said, his voice tight. "Zephyrian settlement in the Kepler sector. They're under attack." The message played through the speakers, crackling with interference from the long journey through space. A voice spoke in the musical language of the Zephyrians, but the computer quickly translated it into flat English words. "This is Colony Administrator Veltar of New Haven. We are under attack by Korthak Dominion forces. Approximately 200 warships have surrounded our world. They demand our surrender within 6 hours or they will begin bombardment of civilian areas. We have no military forces capable of resistance. Please, anyone who can hear this message, we have children here. We have families. We need help." Rebecca felt her stomach drop. The Korthak Dominion was known throughout the galaxy as a machine that ate worlds and spat out slaves. They had consumed dozens of peaceful colonies in the past decade, always following the same pattern. Surround. Demand surrender. Take everything worth taking. Leave nothing but empty worlds behind. 200 ships. Tom whispered. "That's not a raid. That's an invasion fleet." Rebecca nodded grimly. The largest human fleet ever assembled had barely reached 100 ships, and that was for the liberation of New Terra. 200 Korthak warships could level continents. The message continued playing, but now Rebecca heard something that made her blood turn to ice. Behind the administrator's calm, diplomatic words, she could hear other sounds. Crying. Children's voices, high and afraid, calling for their parents. A baby wailing somewhere in the background. The sound of people who knew they were about to die. "How long ago was this sent?" she asked. Tom checked his readings. 4 hours. The signal's been traveling for 2 days to reach us. Rebecca did the math in her head. 6 hours from when the message was sent. 4 hours had already passed during transmission. The Korthak would begin their attack in 2 hours, assuming they kept their word. But the Korthak rarely kept their word when it came to civilians. "What's the Galactic Council saying?" she asked. Tom pulled up another screen showing official channels. Emergency session called. Diplomatic protests filed. They're demanding the Korthak withdraw immediately. And the Korthak response? Nothing. Complete silence. Rebecca stared at the tactical display showing New Haven's location. It was a small blue dot surrounded by the red markers of Korthak ships. Like a tiny island in an ocean of sharks. The Galactic Council would do what they always did. They would talk. They would file papers. They would make speeches about the rights of innocent beings and the importance of peaceful solutions. And while they talked, children would die. But Earth was not part of the Galactic Council. Earth was still considered a probationary species by most of the galaxy. Too young, they said. Too violent. Too unpredictable. Humans had been making contact with alien species for only 50 years, and in that time they had developed a reputation that made other species nervous. Rebecca had heard the stories whispered in diplomatic meetings. How humans had fought wars that lasted decades over principles other species would abandon in days. How they had destroyed their own cities rather than surrender them to enemies. How they treated their soldiers' remains with a reverence that bordered on religious madness. Other species fought for territory, for resources, for survival. Humans fought for ideas. And that made them dangerous in ways that could not be calculated or contained. "Tom," she said quietly, "send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we have a situation." "What should I tell them?" Rebecca looked at the tactical display again. 200 ships against defenseless civilians. The Galactic Council would debate for days while people died. But there was another way. She walked to her private office and opened a safe that held files marked with security classifications so high that most people did not know they existed. Inside was a single folder labeled the catalog in red letters. Inside that folder were 5 names. 5 humans who had been quietly removed from official records, whose existence was denied by every government agency, whose capabilities were spoken of only in whispers by intelligence officers who had clearances so high they barely qualified as human anymore. They were the people Earth called when the impossible needed to become possible. When the unthinkable needed to be thought. When someone had to walk into the darkness and make the monsters afraid. Rebecca picked up her secure communication device and began typing 5 identical messages. Each would go to a different location, a different person, a different legend. The message was simple: you're needed. She sent the messages and sat back in her chair. In 6 hours, maybe less, the Korthak would begin killing children on New Haven. The Galactic Council would spend days debating the proper response. But Earth would answer in the way Earth always answered when innocents called for help. Not with diplomacy or negotiations or carefully worded protests. Earth would send the 5 most dangerous humans in the known galaxy. The monsters were about to learn why humanity's reputation made them wake up screaming. The space station hung in the darkness like a metal spider waiting for prey. It had no name on any official records, no identification markers, no registration number. Most of Earth's military did not know it existed. Those who did know wished they could forget. Jake Matthews arrived first, his transport ship sliding into the docking bay without making a sound. He stepped out wearing clothes that could have belonged to anyone: gray pants, black shirt, jacket that had seen better days. Nothing about him looked special. He was the kind of man you would forget 5 minutes after meeting him. That was exactly what made him so dangerous. The station guards nodded as he passed, but their hands stayed near their weapons. They knew who he was, even if they had never seen his face before. Jake Matthews was the man governments called when someone needed to disappear without anyone knowing how or why. He had toppled 3 different dictatorships by simply walking through their front doors and having quiet conversations with the right people. He found his way to the briefing room and sat down in a chair facing the door. Old habits. Always watch the exits. Always know who is coming before they know you are there. 20 minutes later, Dr. Anna Walsh stepped off her transport. She looked like a teacher, complete with wireframe glasses and gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She carried a small bag and walked with the careful steps of someone who spent more time reading books than running marathons. The station personnel avoided looking at her directly. Anna Walsh was the woman who had written the book on how to break people's minds without ever touching them. She knew exactly what words to say, what fears to touch, what hopes to crush. 3 alien species had surrendered entire fleets after listening to her speak for less than an hour. She nodded politely to Jake as she entered the briefing room and chose a seat with her back to the wall. Professional courtesy between professionals. The third arrival came with more noise. Michael Harris backed his transport into the docking bay like he was parking a truck at a construction site. He was a big man with hands that looked like they could bend steel bars, wearing coveralls stained with oil and chemicals that probably had not been invented yet. The guards relaxed slightly when they saw him. Michael looked like every maintenance worker they had ever met, the kind of guy who could fix your air conditioning or build you a deck in his spare time. They had no idea that those same hands had once built a bomb out of kitchen supplies that had leveled an entire military base. He walked into the briefing room carrying a toolbox that clinked and rattled with each step. Jake and Anna looked up as he entered, and for a moment the 3 of them studied each other like wolves deciding whether to form a pack or start fighting. Lieutenant Emily Parker arrived in a ship that should not have been able to fly. It was covered with dents and scratch marks, held together with what looked like tape and hope. But she landed it with the precision of a surgeon, touching down exactly in the center of the docking bay without making the slightest sound. She was younger than the others, maybe 30 years old, with short blonde hair and the kind of smile that made people trust her instantly. The guards smiled back as she passed, not knowing that Emily Parker had once flown a single fighter ship through an enemy fleet of 50 vessels and destroyed their command ship before they knew she was there. She bounced into the briefing room like she was heading to a party instead of a mission that would probably kill them all. "Hey everyone," she said cheerfully. "This is going to be fun." The others looked at her like she might be insane. Emily's definition of fun involved activities that made other people throw up or have nightmares. The last member of their team was already waiting when they arrived. David Cole sat in the corner with 3 different computers open in front of him, his fingers moving across the keyboards like a piano player performing a concert. He was thin and pale, the kind of person who looked like he had not seen sunlight in months. Because he probably had not. David Cole lived in the world that existed inside computer networks, where information moved faster than light and secrets were just data waiting to be found. He had once crashed the entire communication system of an alien government by sending them a birthday card. He looked up as the others entered, nodded once, and went back to his computers. Whatever he was working on was making him smile, which meant that somewhere in the galaxy, someone was about to have a very bad day. Admiral Kate Morrison entered the room exactly 1 hour after the last team member had arrived. She was a small woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much, wearing a uniform with ribbons and medals that told the story of 40 years spent protecting Earth from threats most people never knew existed. She looked at the 5 people sitting around the table and felt the familiar mixture of pride and terror that came with commanding humanity's most dangerous weapons. These 5 people had capabilities that could change the course of history. They were also completely insane by any normal definition of the word. "Thank you all for coming," she said, activating a holographic display that showed the New Haven system. "We have a situation." The display showed 200 red dots surrounding a single blue dot. It looked like a diagram of an infection surrounding a healthy cell. "Mining colony, peaceful Zephyrian settlement, about 12,000 civilians including 3,000 children. The Korthak Dominion has them surrounded and is demanding surrender. In approximately 4 hours, they will begin orbital bombardment." Emily raised her hand like a student in class. "How many ships are we sending?" Admiral Morrison looked at her with the expression of someone delivering bad news to a terminal patient. "1. Yours." The room fell silent. Even David stopped typing. Jake spoke first. 5 people against 200 warships." "Yes." Anna adjusted her glasses. "Admiral, with respect, that sounds like suicide." Admiral Morrison smiled for the first time since entering the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, since when has impossible odds ever stopped any of you before?" The Retribution moved through space like a ghost that had forgotten it was dead. The ship was black as the void between stars, covered with materials that bent light around it and absorbed energy like a hungry shadow. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than empty space with a slightly different temperature. Emily Parker sat in the pilot seat, her hands dancing over controls that most people would need years to understand. She hummed quietly to herself as she guided their ship through the outer edge of the Korthak fleet, weaving between sensor sweeps like a needle threading through moving cloth. 200 ships, she said cheerfully, as if she was commenting on nice weather. "That's a new record for me. My previous best was destroying 50 ships with just 1 fighter. This should be interesting." Behind her, the other 4 team members prepared for what David Cole had started calling aggressive problem solving. Each of them worked quietly, focused on their part of what was about to become the galaxy's most expensive lesson in why you should never threaten people under human protection. Michael Harris spread out technical drawings of Korthak ship designs across his work table. His thick fingers traced power lines and structural supports with the care of a doctor examining a patient. But Michael was not trying to heal anything. He was looking for the exact spots where the right amount of pressure would make everything fall apart. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a junction where 3 ships had to maintain precise distances from each other. "They are flying in a formation that looks strong, but it's actually fragile. Like a house of cards. You knock out the right support, and the whole thing comes tumbling down." He pulled out a small device that looked like a metal egg. Inside were enough explosives to level a city block. But Michael was not planning to blow up a city. He was planning to create a chain reaction that would make the Korthak fleet destroy itself. Dr. Anna Walsh sat with headphones on, listening to intercepted Korthak communications. She was learning their language, studying their voices, understanding how their minds worked. To most people, the alien voices sounded like growling mixed with clicking sounds. To Anna, they were speaking their deepest fears. "Proud warrior race," she said quietly, making notes in a small book. "Honor-based culture. They fear being seen as weak more than they fear death. Perfect." She began writing what looked like poetry, but the words she chose were designed to cut deeper than any knife. When she was finished, she would know exactly what to say to make brave Korthak warriors run away screaming like frightened children. Jake Matthews sat in the ship's storage area, cleaning weapons that had no names in any official inventory. His hands moved with the automatic precision of someone who had done this thousands of times before. Each knife, each gun, each small explosive device was checked, cleaned, and placed exactly where it needed to be. He was not planning to kill everyone on the Korthak flagship. That would be too simple, too quick. Jake was planning to visit them personally and leave messages that would make them afraid to sleep for the rest of their lives. David Cole had connected his computers directly to the ship's communication array, turning the entire vessel into one massive hacking device. His screens showed the digital nervous system of the Korthak fleet, communication networks, navigation computers, weapon control systems, even the coffee makers in their crew quarters. "Amateurs," he said, shaking his head sadly. "Their security is designed to keep out other Korthak hackers. They have no defense against human creativity." His fingers moved across the keyboards like a musician playing a symphony of destruction. Each keystroke was placing small programs throughout the enemy fleet, little digital time bombs that would explode at exactly the right moment to cause maximum chaos. Emily guided their ship deeper into the Korthak formation, sliding between massive warships that could have blown them apart with a single shot. But the enemy sensors saw nothing. Their ship was invisible, silent, undetectable by any technology the aliens possessed. Beautiful formation, Emily said admiringly, studying the tactical display. Very precise. Very organized. Very predictable. She was already planning her flight patterns, the crazy maneuvers that would make the Korthak gunners fire at shadows and hit their own ships instead. Emily's flying was not just about getting from one place to another. It was about making the enemy so confused and terrified that they would defeat themselves. On the surface of New Haven far below, the Zephyrian colonists huddled in their shelters and waited for death. Their radio telescopes had detected the human ship approaching, and many of them wept when they realized that Earth had sent only one small vessel against the massive enemy fleet. They could not understand how 5 humans thought they could succeed where entire alien armies would fail. The Zephyrians were a peaceful species, farmers and miners who had never seen real war. They had no concept of what humans were capable of when someone threatened the innocent. But the Korthak fleet was about to get an education. General Thakmor stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the countdown timer that showed how much time the colonists had left. 2 hours and 17 minutes until he would begin the bombardment. He felt satisfaction at the thought of another easy conquest, another world added to the Dominion's growing empire. His senses showed no sign of any rescue fleet approaching. The Galactic Council was probably having emergency meetings and making angry speeches, but they would not risk their own ships against such overwhelming force. The humans were too far away and too few to matter. General Thakmor had no idea that death was already moving through his fleet like smoke through a forest. 5 humans had arrived, and they were about to demonstrate why their species was not part of the Galactic Council by choice. The storm was coming, and it would be worse than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The first Korthak ship died at exactly 1423 Galactic Standard Time. The heavy cruiser Death's Glory simply vanished in a flash of white light, turning from a massive warship into scattered metal and regret in less than 2 seconds. One moment it was holding its position in the outer ring of the blockade, and the next moment there was nothing but expanding gas and confused radio chatter. General Thakmor stared at his tactical display in complete confusion. Ship after ship was calling in, asking what had happened, demanding orders, reporting that their sensors showed no enemy weapons fire. The Death's Glory had just exploded for no reason anyone could understand. "Sir," his communications officer said, his voice shaking, "we're losing contact with ships throughout the fleet. The communication network is failing." On board the Retribution, David Cole smiled as he watched his virus spread through the Korthak systems like a digital plague. Every ship in their fleet was now infected with programs that would turn their own computers against them. Navigation systems began showing false readings. Weapon targeting computers started seeing enemies that did not exist. Life support systems began playing music instead of filtering air. Phase 1 complete, David announced cheerfully. They can't talk to each other anymore. Now they are fighting blind. Michael Harris was already suiting up in a spacesuit, preparing for the most dangerous part of his plan. The explosive device that had destroyed the Death's Glory was just the beginning. Now he needed to get close enough to the Korthak formation to place charges at the critical stress points he had identified. "Emily," he said, "I need you to get me within 50 meters of the flagship's port engine section." 50 meters. Emily grinned. "How about 10 meters? I was getting bored flying so far away from them." She began a series of maneuvers that defied every law of physics that reasonable people believed in. The Retribution twisted and spun through the Korthak formation like a leaf in a hurricane, moving so close to the enemy ships that their hulls scraped against each other. But somehow, Emily kept them invisible and intact. Dr. Anna Walsh activated the communication system and began broadcasting on the emergency frequencies that every Korthak ship was required to monitor. But instead of human words, perfect Korthak battle language flowed from her lips like poisoned honey. "Warriors of the Dominion," she said in their own tongue, "your ancestors watch from the spirit realm and weep with shame. You who were once the terror of the galaxy now flee from shadows like frightened prey beasts. Your children will grow up knowing their fathers ran from ghosts." The words hit the Korthak crews like physical blows. Their culture was built on honor, courage, and the respect of their ancestors. To be called cowards by an enemy who spoke their sacred language better than they did was worse than any weapon. Ship captains began making reckless decisions, trying to prove their bravery. Some broke formation to hunt for the invisible enemy. Others opened fire on anything that looked suspicious, including their own ships. Jake Matthews had already left the Retribution through the airlock, drifting through space in a suit so black it seemed to absorb light. He moved between the Korthak ships like a shadow with deadly purpose, using magnetic clamps to stick to their hulls and cutting tools to slice through armor like paper. He was not trying to destroy the ships from outside. That would take too long. Instead, he was getting inside them. The first Korthak crew to encounter Jake Matthews would talk about it for the rest of their very short lives. He appeared in their engineering section like a nightmare made real, moving through their ship as if their weapons and armor meant nothing. But he did not kill them. That would have been too merciful. Instead, he left them alive but paralyzed with terror, carving messages into their metal walls with tools that cut through alien steel like butter. The words were in perfect Korthak script: Earth remembers. Earth is coming. Earth does not forgive. By the time Jake had visited 6 ships, word was spreading through the fleet that something impossible was happening. Enemy soldiers were appearing inside sealed vessels, walking through walls like spirits, leaving behind messages that made hardened warriors weep with fear. Emily was flying attack patterns that seemed designed to trigger every instinct evolution had built into prey animals. The Retribution moved like a predator playing with its food, appearing just long enough for enemy gunners to see it before vanishing again. But each time it appeared, it was in a position that should have been impossible to reach. Korthak ship captains found themselves firing at their own vessels, convinced they were shooting at the human ship. Their targeting computers, infected by David's virus, showed enemies everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Michael Harris finished placing his charges at the exact points where the Korthak formation was most vulnerable. Each explosive was tiny, no bigger than a coin, but they were positioned with mathematical precision at the spots where the fleet structure would collapse. Charges set, he reported. Recommend immediate withdrawal to minimum safe distance. Define minimum safe distance, Emily asked as she spun their ship away from the enemy fleet. About 3 star systems, Michael said seriously. The charges detonated in sequence, each explosion carefully timed to create maximum chaos. Ships that had been flying in perfect formation suddenly found themselves on collision courses with their neighbors. The beautiful, organized fleet began to crumble like a house built on sand. Dr. Anna Walsh's psychological warfare reached its peak as she began broadcasting on all frequencies, her voice now carrying the authority of a Korthak battle commander giving orders to retreat. All ships withdraw immediately, she commanded. Enemy force too strong. Save yourselves. Run. The fake orders, combined with the explosions, the communication failures, the mysterious intruder, and the impossible enemy ship that appeared and vanished at will, finally broke the Korthak spirit completely. Ships began fleeing in all directions. Some fired on each other in panic. Others simply shut down their engines and broadcast surrender messages to empty space. General Thakmore watched his mighty fleet dissolve into chaos and felt his proud warrior heart crack like glass. He had come to conquer a defenseless mining colony and instead found himself facing something that turned his nightmares into pleasant dreams. The humans had not fired a single shot at the planet below. They had simply arrived and made his fleet destroy itself. 3 days later, the silence around New Haven was louder than any explosion. The twin suns of the Kepler system shone down on a world where children played in the streets again. Zephyrian families emerged from their underground shelters, blinking in the bright light and trying to understand what had happened. Where once 200 enemy warships had blocked out the sky, now there was only empty space filled with floating debris and the occasional piece of twisted metal that had once been part of the mighty Korthak fleet. Colony Administrator Veltar stood in his communication center, staring at reports that made no sense. His sensors showed wreckage scattered across 3 different star systems. Some Korthak ships had fled so fast they had damaged their own engines. Others had simply shut down and were drifting in space, their crews too traumatized to respond to radio calls. How many human ships did you say attacked the fleet? He asked his sensor operator for the 10th time. 1, sir. Just 1 small vessel. It remained in our system for 3 days, then departed without making any contact with us. Veltar looked at the tactical recordings again. 1 human ship against 200 Korthak warships. It should have been impossible. It should have been suicide. Instead, it had been the most complete military victory in recorded galactic history. The Retribution was already heading back toward Earth space when the first Korthak rescue ships arrived. The aliens who came to collect survivors found their fellow warriors in a state that no military doctor had ever seen before. They sat in corners, staring at nothing, whispering about shadows that walked through walls and voices that spoke their deepest fears in their own language. The rescue teams tried to question the survivors, but the stories they heard made no sense. 5 humans had somehow appeared inside sealed ships. Computer systems had turned against their own crews. Their weapons had fired on their own fleet. An invisible enemy had flown impossible patterns that made their best pilots sick just thinking about them. General Thakmore himself was found on his flagship's bridge, sitting in his command chair and staring at a tactical display that showed nothing but empty space. When his rescuers tried to speak to him, he only repeated the same words over and over: "They were just humans. They were just humans." The story spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. In the halls of the Galactic Council, emergency sessions ran for days as representatives tried to understand what had happened. Intelligence agencies updated their files on humanity, adding new classifications that had never been needed before. The humans were no longer listed as a probationary species or a developing civilization. The new classification was simple and terrifying: extinction event, avoid contact. On Korthak Prime, the military high command held secret meetings behind doors guarded by their most trusted soldiers. The reports from New Haven were declared classified at the highest level. Any officer who spoke about the battle outside of secure briefings was immediately transferred to distant frontier posts where they could not spread panic. But stories have a way of growing in the dark like dangerous plants. Whispers spread through the Korthak fleet about the humans who could walk through walls, who could make entire fleets destroy themselves, who could turn a warrior's courage into liquid fear with just a few words. Other species began to take notice. The proud Altarian Empire, which had been planning to expand into human space, quietly cancelled their invasion plans and sent diplomatic gifts instead. The Centauri Federation, which had been considering whether to include humans in their trade agreements, immediately approved full membership with benefits that no other species had ever received. On a dozen different worlds, military academies updated their training programs. New courses appeared with titles like Human Tactical Psychology and Asymmetric Warfare, the Earth Model. Students studied the Battle of New Haven like ancient scholars studying religious texts, trying to understand how 5 individuals had accomplished something that entire fleets could not achieve. But it was the children's voices that mattered most. On New Haven, in the central square of the main colony, the Zephyrians built a monument from the metal salvaged from Korthak ships. It was not large or fancy, just a simple stone pillar with words carved in both Zephyrian flowing script and the angular letters humans used. They cried for help, and the humans answered. Every day, Zephyrian children brought flowers to place at the base of the monument. Many of them had been born after the battle, but they grew up knowing the story. When monsters came to eat their world, 5 humans had appeared from nowhere and made the monsters run away screaming. The children did not understand military tactics or psychological warfare or advanced technology. They only knew that when bad things happened to good people, humans would come to help. And across the galaxy, in government offices and military headquarters and intelligence briefings held in rooms that did not officially exist, a new protocol appeared in contact procedures for every known species. The wording was different in each language, but the meaning was always the same. Under no circumstances should hostile action be taken against any species under human protection. If contact has already been initiated, recommend immediate withdrawal and formal apology. Failure to comply may result in intervention by human special forces. Survival not guaranteed. The age of human guardianship had begun. Jake Matthews, Dr. Anna Walsh, Michael Harris, Lieutenant Emily Parker, and David Cole returned to Earth quietly, their names appearing in no official records, their faces seen by no cameras, their existence denied by every government agency. They went back to their normal lives, whatever normal meant for people like them. But somewhere in a secure vault on Lunar Station, Admiral Kate Morrison kept the catalogue ready. 5 names that could change the course of history. 5 humans who had proven that sometimes the best way to keep peace was to make war so terrible that no one wanted to try it again. The galaxy had learned its lesson. When innocent people called for help, Earth would answer. And the monsters would learn to be afraid of the dark. Because in the dark, humans were waiting.